All right, yesterday we talked about the light reaction, which is the first half of photosynthesis. Today we're going to hit the Calvin cycle, which is the second half of photosynthesis. The Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma of the chlorophyll, and its whole purpose is to convert carbon dioxide into glucose. Now, you should remember from the main photosynthesis reaction that carbon dioxide is one of your reactants in the compound or in the whole equation. So carbon dioxide combines with another 5-carbon compound that is present in the chloroplast. When you combine carbon dioxide with a 5-carbon compound, since there's 5 carbons here and 1 here, you combine them, that makes a 6-carbon compound. This 6-carbon compound is extremely unstable, and it immediately splits into 2 3-carbon compounds. Okay, so again, you've got a 6-carbon compound, and basically you're just splitting it into half, into 2 compounds that have 3 carbons each. Okay, then you're going to take that ATP and the NADPH that we got from the light cycle. We're going to use the energy from those 2 high energy molecules, and we're going to rearrange these 2 3-carbon compounds into 2 different 3-carbon compounds. So basically you can kind of think of this whole process as like playing with Legos. Okay, you've got a 1 and a 5, and you stick them all together to make a 6. You break the 6 in half to make a 3. Then you take them apart and you rearrange them all, and you make 2 different 3-carbon compounds. Okay, just like playing with Legos. Now it does take energy. And the reason we went through the light cycle was to provide these 2 high energy molecules so that we had the energy to be able to do this. Okay? Now, I then am going to take these 2 different 3-carbon compounds, and they're actually going to go 2 different directions. One of them is going to go off to make glucose, and the other one is going to be recycled to reform this 5-carbon compound that was made. Now, obviously, glucose is C6H12O6. It has a total of 6 carbons. Well, right now, I just have 1 3-carbon compound available, so I'm going to have to take another CO2 and run through this again. Eventually, what has to happen is that it's going to take a total of 6 carbons 6 carbon dioxides run through this cycle to completely make glucose and to recycle this 5-carbon compound. So that's actually where the 6 comes from, because if you would actually do all the math as you went through here, I would have to have a 5-carbon compound, I'm going to have way more than just a 3-carbon compound a couple of different times, because it has to come out even. I actually have to have 5 of these to recycle them in order to go through and then make 3 5-carbon compounds. Okay? Now, if you didn't quite follow all that, that's okay, because I'm not really overly concerned that you understand this intermediate process here. What I do want you to understand is this. The ATP and the NADPH that we got from the light cycle, and you'll notice I used the same colors that I did on the board yesterday. These are what powers this conversion. And additionally, some of the ATP that we made in the light cycle is also going to power this recycling event to take these 3-carbon compounds to reform them into 5-carbon compounds. And that's why this is called a cycle, because these 5-carbon compounds, we're going to keep recycling them over and over and over, so I can combine them with the carbon dioxide to eventually make the glucose. Okay? So that's why it's called a cycle, because I keep recycling this over and over and over again. All right. If I look at the overall formula for the photosynthesis reaction, and hopefully this looks very familiar right now, let's kind of break this down into where all these pieces came from. Okay? The carbon dioxide actually was brought in as a part of the Calvin cycle. So this is the Calvin cycle. Do you remember where the water was? Hopefully you remember seeing it yesterday in the light cycle, because we took the water and the sunlight broke it down into oxygen and to hydrogen ions. So this is in the light cycle. The light energy, where we were using the sunshine, that was in the light cycle yesterday also. You don't see a sunshine up here anyplace. So this is also from the light cycle. Now, just because I don't need light for the Calvin cycle doesn't necessarily mean it happens in the dark. It can happen in the dark, but a lot of times it happens in the light because the light cycle is happening in the light as well. They used to call it the dark cycle, but they don't tend to do that anymore because people mistakenly thought that it had to take place in the dark, and it does not. Okay, C6H12O6, Calvin cycle or light cycle? Well, yeah, we just talked about that part today where the glucose was being made. So this is part of the Calvin cycle. And then the 6O2, if you remember from yesterday, that came about from when that water was split. And so the 6O2 also comes from the light cycle, okay? Now, the other thing that I want to point out here is that once you've used this ATP and this NADPH, these are going to end up then becoming, you're going to have an ADP and a P because you've broken that phosphorus off of there. You're going to take the energy out of this molecule, and that's going to turn that back into an ADBP+, and the hydrogen is going to go into the glucose. Okay, so these things were necessary for the light cycle. Remember I told you we pulled them from someplace? Well, this is where we pulled them from. This is part of that same cycle where then we took the high energy electrons in the light cycle, added them to here, and reformed this again. So it's a continual cycle among these things as well. So everything here is reused and recycled. Nothing is wasted. If you remember, even when Jesus made the comment after he turned the loaves and the fish into food for 5,000 people, he told his disciples, go back and pick everything up so that nothing is wasted. Well, we can see a great example here where he's not wasting anything. Everything that is used here is either used as a product here, or it's completely being recycled and it's being reused again. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to give you an overall viewpoint, an overall, like a helicopter view kind of what this whole process looks like. And I gave you this paper, and I could have drawn the arrows on it for you, but I chose not to because I want you to draw the arrows in, and I want you to really think through this whole process with me as we do this together. Okay. So this is a big summary of what photosynthesis looks like. So light enters the chloroplast. And so as the light enters the chloroplast, the chlorophyll is going to absorb that light, right? Okay, all the pigments that are in there, they absorb that light. It's being absorbed in photosystem 2 and in photosystem 1. And so it captures the light energy. Now, some of that energy is used to split water into hydrogen ions and oxygen, and the oxygen gets released by the leaf out into the air, and then we're able to breathe that. Okay, some of the energy goes through the photosystem. It excites all the electrons then go through the other photosystem. They get it excited again, they get turned into ATP and NADPH. So some of that energy is carried into the stroma, where I'm making the NADPH and the ATP. All right. When this water is split, the oxygen is going to get released into the air. So this arrow goes over here this way. Once this is split, it initially pumps the hydrogen inside the thylakoid, but then it goes through the ATP synthase, goes back out, and it goes back into the stroma. The energy that's carried into the stroma then, in the form of ATP and NADPH, is going to be used to take the hydrogen ions and the carbon dioxide that it's going to bring in to make glucose or other carbohydrates. Okay, it doesn't have to be glucose, but that's what we're using for our examples here just because it's the most simple way to think about it. Okay, so we're going to make glucose or other carbohydrates. Those carbohydrates can't be made unless I also have carbon dioxide entering the leaf. So we need that arrow up here to show that it's the hydrogen and the carbon dioxide together that are going to make those carbohydrates. And then the carbohydrates are going to be carried into the cells of the plant for storage. Okay. Now, the other thing I want to do with this diagram, now that we have all the arrows drawn in here is we want to be able to take this and divide it into the light reaction and the dark reaction, or not the dark reaction. See, I grew up learning about the dark reaction, and so I'm still using that terminology sometimes, so hopefully you guys won't make the same mistake. So what happens here is, where's the division line? The division line actually happens right here, okay? And so above the line is the light reaction, and below the line is the Calvin cycle, okay? So the Calvin cycle starts where your carbon dioxide enters, and it combines with the hydrogen ion that has already been carried there to make that to make that glucose, all right? So hopefully that overview kind of helps you put all those pieces together. I know that this is complex. As you're trying to learn and master this process, really focus on your own questions and the study guide questions that I gave you, because they're going to help you focus on it and say, okay, what are the big important parts of this process that I need to have down and that I need to have mastered, okay? Because the on your own questions and the study guide questions, if you can answer those, then that means that you're going to understand these processes to the point where you'll be able to do a great job on the test.